We're going to take notes in our math journal today. So you're going to turn to the table of contents, write multiplying decimals, dot, 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 page 15. Then you're going to turn to page 15. Make sure you number it, page 15. You're going to write multiplying decimals at the top, and then you're going to copy down these notes. So it says multiplication of decimals is just like multiplication of whole numbers. Do not line up the decimals. You've been hearing Miss Bridges tell you line up the decimals, line up the decimals, line up the decimals for like 6 weeks now, and now I'm telling you, do not line up the decimals. You actually ignore the decimals and multiply like whole numbers. Once you have your product, count the decimal places in both factors and put the same number of decimal places in your product. So you might want to pause the video now and get that copied down, and then we're going to do 2 examples. So now that you have all of that copied down, we're going to do 2 examples. The first example, we're going to write examples here, examples. So the first example that we're going to do is going to be 57 times 2.3. Now, I purposefully wrote it this way. We do not multiply it this way, but I wrote it this way because the second step says do not line up the decimals. If I was going to line up these decimals, there's a decimal at the end here and there's a decimal in the middle here, but I'm not lining them up. I'm just going to write them 5723. Yes, there's a decimal right here, but I'm going to ignore it and I'm just going to pretend that's 23. So I'm going to multiply 57 times 23. 3 times 7 is 21. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 2 more is 17. I move over to my tens digit because we're pretending this is 23. And so I put a 0 as my placeholder. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 more is 11. I add my partial products, so that's 1, 11, 3, and 1. Now the last step says count the places in both factors. Count the decimal places in both factors. So now I'm going to look at the decimal places. Well, let's see. 57 doesn't have any decimal places. 23, it's got 1 decimal place right here. Okay, I counted 1. Then it says put the same number of decimal places in your product. So I'm going to go to my product and I'm going to go, 1 decimal place. And I'm going to put a decimal there. There's 1 decimal place up here. There's 1 decimal place down here. So my answer is actually not 1,311. It's 131 and 1/10. All right, we're going to look at one more example. 18 and 1/10 times 3 and 7/10. We are not going to multiply them like this. We're going to write them one on top of the other, and we're going to ignore the decimals. So we're actually going to pretend this is 181, even though there's a decimal there. And we're going to pretend this is 37, even though there's a decimal there. Now, it just so happens that these decimals accidentally got lined up. Is that okay? Yes, it is. I didn't purposefully line them up. It just happened like that. If I write 181 times 37, that's where it lands. So we're going to multiply. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 8 is 56. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 5 more, 12. We have done our ones digit because we're pretending that's 37, so we're going to scoot over to our tens digit, which means we need a 0 as a placeholder. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 8 is 24. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 more is 5. I'm going to add my partial products. 7, 9, 6, 6. Notice I have ignored my decimals the whole time. There is no decimals in any of my partial products because I ignore them and I pretend they're whole numbers until the very end. Now that I'm at the very end, I go back and I count the decimal places in my factors. Well, let's see. I got 1 decimal place here and I got 1 decimal place here, and I know if I count 1, 2, I have 2 decimal places. So I'm going to go to my answer and I'm going to count 1, 2. So I'm going to put 2 decimal places in my answer. So instead of 6,697, it's actually 66 and 97 hundredths. So you are going to complete placing decimals on the front on that worksheet. All you have to do, this is the worksheet you're going to complete. All you have to do is count the decimal places in both factors, count the decimal places in the answer, and put it. You don't actually have to multiply it. All this is getting you to do is practice placing the decimal where it's supposed to go. After you finish placing the decimal where it's supposed to go, you're going to turn over to the back and you're going to complete these 16 problems showing all your work. Also, don't forget you have a review sheet this week. Review sheet 8. You need to make sure that you have all these problems. I believe there's 20. Yes, there is. You need to have all 20 problems done by Friday.